The wedding gift. Days had passed since that unforgettable night, yet Archie and Gwen still basked in its afterglow. Their love, strengthened by the presence of family and friends, seemed to shine brighter with each passing moment. As they returned from their honeymoon, they eagerly set about making their home a true reflection of their love. With a smile on her face, Gwen delved into the pile of wedding gifts, each one a symbol of the love and support from those around them. Though she knew Archie came from a well-respected family, she never could have imagined the outpouring of love she received on their big day. "The Wilson family gave us some marvelous marble coasters," Gwen told Archie. "That's nice, dear," Archie responded as he slipped a cutting board out of some decorative wrapping. One package caught Archie's attention. It was past the gravy boat behind a set of matching towels. "Oh, dear," Gwen's voice full of sympathy and emotion. "Look." Gwen held a rather large book in her hand, offering it to him with the first page open. He closed it, triggering a look of confusion on Gwen's face. He tilted his head and shrugged as he said, "I just want to see the cover first." It was a family Bible. Their initials were written at the center. Below that, in an elegant font, read Semper Fidelis. It was Latin and meant always faithful. Nodding his approval, he paused for the Marine Corps in remembrance of his duty, then opened the page and read, "In loving memory of Archie and Gwen Emerson, united in marriage on August 5th, 1892, may this holy book be a guide and source of comfort throughout their journey together, forever and always." His eyes quickly drew back to the gift that called out to him earlier. "Darling, what's that?" he asked, gently placing the Bible on the coffee table. Picking up the gift, he noticed there was no name, no card, and no way of knowing its origins. "Maybe a cigar box," Gwen suggested. "No, it's too tall." Archie picked it up, and too deep. The box was a perfect cube, about a foot in size. Its curved edges were painted with brilliantly bordered lines of blues, reds, and gold. On one side of the box, a man worshipped a diamond floating high above him. On the opposite side, another man sat cross-legged, hands extended towards a fiery flame. A third on the top, his hands to his temples, as a diamond and flame hovered on either side of his shoulders with bright blue and orange streaks of lightning connecting them. "Who do you think gave us this?" Archie asked. "I don't know. Oh, look." A crystal decanter set. "This will be great for dinner parties." At first he couldn't place why he felt the box was strange. At a glance it looked more wooden, but to the touch he couldn't feel any abrasions or imperfections in the smoothness of the surface. His interest peaked when he realized that it had no seams, no indications of how it was put together. It wasn't heavy enough to be solid, nor did it feel like it was made of wood. "Archie, did you hear me?" Archie snapped back to reality. "What? Can you help me?" Gwen asked. Stumped over the questions in his mind, he set it aside and continued unwrapping the gifts that were quickly filling the living room, but Archie wondered about the box. Where did it come from? It had a sense of beauty that escaped description. Ultimately, he placed it on the mantel in the living room and returned to his life. They speculated on the decorative box for weeks after tying the knot. Neither friends nor family claimed it. Gwen eventually insisted that it didn't go with the suede furniture, so it was moved to the study where Archie managed his businesses. That was when it started. Archie's mind would routinely be drawn to the gift. There was an attraction to the elegant and mysterious box, distracting him from his duties as a husband, father, and businessman. Soon he developed an almost addictive habit of gazing upon it. Towards the end of his life, he'd think about the what-if questions we ask ourselves when we try to reconcile our youth-driven dreams against the realities we receive. What if he'd thrown it away? What if he had put it in storage and let it fade into the past? As his age raced through time, he feared he'd never discover the truth behind the lockless box. Archie Emerson was old and tired. He grasped the bedpan, expelling the remnants of who knows what. He hadn't eaten in days. It felt as though the cancer was consuming his soul. Even now, at the end of his life, his gaze strayed to the box on the shelf, a spot beyond his family. He'd failed, and now his time was up. "Pops, are you okay?" He nodded with a grunt, his eyes closed. Was that his son? He wasn't sure. His hearing was muddled, and his vision was getting blurry, yet he could only think and focus on one thing through the haze, the obsession that consumed his life. He would have cursed that box long ago if he could have found the fortitude. That eerie enigma would remain so to him. There was one that could solve the puzzle. Archie knew Bernard wouldn't have listened, much less spoken to him. It's why a lawyer Archie retained would hold the letter until the end. With more than 60 years since friendly words were spoken, he acknowledged it was a petulant rivalry through the lens of death and wished he could have changed things, but it was too late. He'd caused too much destruction. He tried reaching out several times, tried to bridge the chasm between him and Bernard, but he failed. Bernard wanted nothing to do with him, and for a good reason. He hated knowing he'd never learn the secrets the box held once he was gone. Yet some comfort came with the faith that there was a chance Bernard could possibly do what he could not. The letter. Bernard was 16, and he had fallen for Gwen, but she was taken by Archie. They married and had children. Soon the grandkids were too numerous to count, while Bernard remained alone. He tried to find comfort in his single life, telling himself that he was happy, but the familiar feelings of loneliness always lingered, pulling him into darker places. He found solace in his work and reading. Bernard was a locksmith, and there wasn't a lock he couldn't pick or a safe he couldn't crack. He found joy in his reading, too, immersing himself in the worlds of his favorite books. He felt most at peace when he was pursuing his passions, and he would lose himself in his work and stories, traveling to distant lands and discovering new realms. Despite all this, Bernard couldn't escape the emptiness that plagued him. He tried to push it aside, but it was always there, a constant reminder of what he had lost. He searched for meaning in his work, in his books, but the answer always eluded him. He was left to ponder the cost of his solitude and the price of a heart yearning for a love he would never know. Bernard didn't hear the buzzer from the doorbell. He was asleep on his lacy boy recliner with a tattered copy of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit clenched in his fingers. He'd read it many times. The entire series, in fact, but knowing what would happen next didn't stop him from getting lost in the grand world of Middle-earth. Molly, his purebred, all-black lab, laid on the carpet in front of the fireplace. Ring, ring, ring. The sound began to pull him out of his slumber because with his old age, reading strained his eyes. He'd often find himself asleep in his chair, book half closed to one side of his lap or the other, or on the floor. Ring, ring, ring. Molly lifted her head and slowly pulled herself up, curving her back with a massive yawn. "Molly, girl, are you ready for some lunch?" Bernard asked. Molly's ears perked at the familiar word, lunch. He still hadn't heard the bell ringing or his front door opening. "Benny! Benny, are you up?" a female voice yelled down from the first floor. Molly dashed to the doorway and down the stairs. Bernard struggled to get out of his recliner. The lever to lower the footrest was getting harder to push. He'd have to look at that, but not now. "Benny, are you up there?" she asked. "Hey, Molly, want a treat?" "Good girl." "Evie, don't give her anything. She needs to eat lunch first. Those treats upset her stomach," Bernard shouted as he glanced around his apartment, attempting to straighten up a little. Evelyn often stopped by to check on him, and he appreciated her for that, but not when it interrupted his reading. "Evie, I'm coming. I was, researching," he explained. Bernard glanced at his library along the north side of his room. It towered with books, but they were all closed. He passed by, opened one of his encyclopedias, then placed it next to a journal he'd kept on cracking safes made by the Barnes Safe and Lock Company out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They were known to have loose pins. Having more space in the cavities made it harder to feel when they dropped than the Herringhall Marvin safes, which had a tighter construction. The tighter the slots, the easier it was to feel the tumblers shift into place. He pushed the notes aside to give space for the new book on a small table near the door, opening it to a random page. It was hard to predict what she'd do when she paid him her unsolicited visits. He threw a pair of dirty underwear he had drying on the furnace into his bathroom as he stepped to the stairwell leading down to the shop. He could hear Molly's excited breathing as she pranced around the first floor with all the attention Evelyn was giving her. "I was busy working on a problem," Bernard answered the unasked question, as if trying to convince her further of his lie. "Oh, that's nice." "Did you enjoy your evening nap?" she replied, setting a plastic bag on the counter. "I brought you a sandwich, a banana and some castor oil mixed with honey to help keep you moving." "Now tell me, how are you today?" she asked as she started straightening out the mess he'd made since the last time she came to the shop. "I'll have you know that I do my best work when I'm asleep," Bernard replied with a sly smile. "I'm sure you've been doing great work then. What are you reading these days? Did you finish The Last Battle?" Evelyn asked. Bernard nodded. "I'm deep into the mountains. Bilbo is separated from the group and about to find the ring." "Back to the Hobbit, I see." Evelyn placed her purse on a windowsill. "How many times have you read it now?" "Just 3. This will be the 4th, and before you say anything. I like it, and I don't care what you think." Evelyn pointed at him. "I'm just saying that reading is all well and good, but those stories aren't real. You should be out living your own adventures." Bernard paused, unsure of how to respond. Seconds passed before Evelyn continued. "Clifford and I missed you at our New Year's party. We had someone for you to meet, but you never showed." I never said that I would, Bernard said as he placed some food in a bowl for Molly, which the dog hadn't noticed. Molly was occupied with Evelyn, hoping for treats. Evelyn ignored his comment. She's cute and exactly the type of woman you need, Benny. You know what I need, do you? Bernard waved his hands in the air. I have everything I need right here. It also doesn't help that you don't leave your shop. Benny, you really need to get out sometime, Evelyn said as she picked up a mostly empty Gibbons beer can. Here you go, he exclaimed, pointing at the beverage. Evelyn looked at him blankly. There I go. She shot him a quizzical look. What? Right, how do you think I got that beer? They don't magically appear. I go. Bernard pointed to the front door and added some enthusiasm to his voice. Out to get them? Bernard proceeded to flutter his fingers. I see the world, I see the street, and I see people at the store, and from time to time I even go to a lunch car and eat there. So I do get out and see the world, Bernard said as he started flipping through some old invoices. To his shock, they were more than 3 months old. Had it been that long since he had a paying customer, he really needed to get some work. Thank God for Social Security and living far below your means. Molly, convinced there were no more treats to be had, shuffled to her bowl, even though Bernard watched as she ravishingly consumed every morsel as if she was starved. Evelyn poured the remnants of the can down a sink in the back. I was saving that, Bernard protested. This isn't living, sweetie, Evelyn said as she threw the can into the trash. A bell rang as the door opened. He watched Evelyn find herself back in the front of the shop and focused on cleaning the only chair in the lobby. Molly shuffled her way to the front to lie on the warm floor in front of the glass door, the light shining over her silky smooth fur. The man stepped forward to prevent Molly from leaning against his nice clean shoes. The shoes matched the high-end suit he was wearing. Evelyn huffed as she moved from the chair. Upstairs into his apartment. If a new, well-dressed customer hadn't just walked in, he would have fussed her for going into the back. That was his place, and he didn't want her poking around. It was okay for her to clean the area where customers would come in. However, each time she visited, she'd inevitably violate his privacy, which would inevitably upset him. Pardon me, Evie. Speaking of no customers, I happen to have one to attend to, Bernard said as he turned to the man in the tailor-made suit. Sir, what can I do for you? Oh, my, she shouted from the upstairs bedroom. He winced and tried to push her voice out of his head. Sir, are you Bernard Robinson? The man in the suit asked before looking at a sheet of paper. Bernard Arthur Robinson? The use of his full name made him pause. Few people knew his middle name. Do I know you? Bernard asked. Do you need me to look at a lock? Bernard looked around to see if the man had left something on the porch, because I don't make house calls anymore. You'll have to bring it here, and I can take a look. It was the suit's turn to act surprised as he looked out to the front porch, trying to surmise what Bernard was focused on. What? No, sir. I don't need anything fixed. I represent Mr. Archibald Emerson, and he asked that I deliver. Oh, you shouldn't have said that, Evelyn said from upstairs. As usual, she was prying into places she didn't belong. Bernard turned away. Evie, I can handle this. Bernard calmly turned back to the man in the suit. Get out! Told you, she chimed as he moved from one side of his apartment to the other. The suit stiffened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just get out of my shop. I will never sell. I don't want to talk to or meet him. No matter how many lawyers he sends to threaten me, I will not be bullied, so get out. His voice was well on its way to shouting, Benny, be nice. Shut it, Evie. This is none of your business, Bernard snapped. I don't think you understand, the man said as he pulled out a sealed envelope. I have this letter, and You can take your letter and stick it up your... Benny, Evelyn shouted from the bedroom. But this letter is for you. It was Mr. Emerson's wish that you read this letter, and still riding off the anxiety of Eve's prying ears, Bernard ripped the letter from the guy's hand and tossed it into the trash. Fine, I've taken your letter. Now you can go, and we can both get back to our day, okay? Bernard turned and walked behind the counter towards his stairs to coax Evie down and out of his shop. Molly sat up and stared at the man, expecting a treat. The man didn't extend his hand, so she followed Bernard toward the back. He'd tried for years to get rid of Evelyn and had yet to succeed. Once he had even begged her husband to ask her to stop, but it didn't help. Visiting a single man so often couldn't be healthy, and he needed to know. But here she was years later, and nothing had changed. Evie, come down from there. You know my leg hurts walking up the stairs. She wouldn't listen. Evelyn knew Bernard wouldn't go up the stairs unless he absolutely had to, and he'd never laid a hand on her. It was a play repeated in one shape or another for dozens, if not hundreds of times over the previous 50 years. I'll be done in a minute. I just need to clean out your bathroom. Now, Evie, stop and come down now.
Just a moment, darling.
The suit stepped towards Bernard, emboldened in the moment. Mr. Robinson, I have been informed of the tempered relationship between you and Mr. Emerson. I would be remiss if I did not express that treating a man's dying wish in this manner is beyond deplorable. I, sir, wish you the best, and will leave the package on your front porch. Good day. The lawyer shut the door, and Bernard paused to consider his words, to let his brain catch up to his ears. Dying wish? Was Archie really dead? He'd heard rumors of the man's sickness, but he wasn't that old. But Archie did have that surgery. 8 years earlier? Bernard paused at the steps and checked himself. He wasn't sure how he felt about the news. The man was gone. Done. It's over. Finally over. Evelyn finished, came down, and began picking up her stuff. Honey, I wish I could say I was all done. Put that up there. She pointed. Needs more than a gentle cleaning. I'll have to come back later. Then, shifting as if she didn't know the man was no longer in the shop, she said, Where's your new friend? My friend Bernard put as much sarcasm in his voice, had pressing business to attend to. It's because you scared him away. That is not how you make friends. Bernard said, Mind your own. Business. Yes, I know, she said with a wave of her hand. You might have told me that a time or two. Evelyn gave everything one last glance. And what is this? Evelyn checked the trash that she'd just cleaned out minutes earlier. Leave it there, Evelyn. As usual, Evelyn didn't listen to him. She pulled the garbage out and looked at it. It's for you. You should read it. Evelyn, it's from him. You know how I feel about him. I've vowed never to... Your vows are null and void, Benny. I heard the lawyer. He's gone. Archie is dead. You should show enough respect to read his final thoughts. Good or bad? Bernard tapped on the counter, slowly shaking his head as Evelyn placed the envelope in front of him. Of course he heard. She had the ears of an elephant, which Bernard had learned had hearing 20 times better than humans. Or perhaps they could hear at frequencies 20 times lower. He'd have to go check when he had time to confirm. Annoyed at himself for not remembering the exact fact, he picked up the recovered letter and stared at it for a long moment. Evelyn for once didn't speak. She knew to give him the time and space he needed to process the news in the letter. What could be inside? A final insult, talking about how Archie, the man, the pillar of the community, was better than him in every way. He married his girl, had kids with her, and lived the happy, love-filled life he always wanted. Even still, knowing Archie was dead, Bernard held a little bit of hate for the man. Several minutes passed before he knew what he'd do. Many options came to mind. Burn it and move on, but not knowing would haunt him. In the end, there was no way he wouldn't open it and read every insulting word. They'd gnaw at him in the waking moments of his sleep-deprived nights. He'd toss and turn about how Archie was right, how he did have a better life, and everything was wonderful on his side of the tracks. Gwen was gone for over a decade now. Just as Evelyn reached the door to leave, he said, Evie. She turned and looked. He looked to the floor and shrugged. I'm old and rough. He walked around his bench and stepped up to her, offering his closed hand and motioning for her to open hers. She did, and he dropped a butterfly brooch into her waiting palm. Oh, Bernie! She exclaimed. He waved her words out of the air. I know how you like butterflies, and, well, I thought you might like it. Evelyn's smile was wide as she brought the intricate jewelry to her chest. Bernard, this had to cost a fortune. Now, behind his workbench, he didn't look up when he said it was nothing. After a long silence followed, Evelyn said, What's in the envelope? Bernard flipped over the envelope and pulled at the edges to unseal the fold. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It appeared to have been written by Archie himself. Dear Bernard, if you are reading this, you might have had a change of heart, or perhaps you couldn't keep yourself from knowing what was inside. If I know you, it's the latter. The truth is, I've asked my lawyer to send you this letter and leave you with a package because I wanted to share with you a secret, one that a select few know. The package I'm leaving you is a mystery within a mystery, a puzzle the likes of which you've never seen. As much as this may come as a shock to you, I had hoped we could work on it together. However, it would appear that it wasn't meant to be. I have left some insights to help you grasp more truths. Please look at it and give it a chance. If not for me, for the friendship we never had, consider it a challenge. I'm passing this mystery to you because I failed to solve it. I have faith that you might succeed. This gift is more than what it seems. Do not let it grab hold of you. Don't let it possess you as it did me, not for one solitary second. If it's too much, do what I was unable to. Get rid of it. Archibald Emerson. The Box and the Journal. Bernard took a moment to figure out what Archie was talking about. It took several minutes and 2 rereads to catch the core purpose of the letter. There was a package that he'd left behind.
A mysterious package.
Bernard couldn't work out how Archie was planning to exact some final revenge. The man that won the love of his life's heart, the man that took his business from him, establishing in the end with his final act he still had the upper hand, but Bernard didn't see that tone in the letter. "Benny, come here. Your friend left a box out here," Evelyn shouted from the front porch. Bernard looked up and leaned to the side. He watched Evelyn nudge at it with her foot, kicking it to see how heavy it was. He set the letter down, paused, thought better, then picked it up to place it into his pocket before walking to the front door. He grabbed the dolly he used for moving heavy safes around on his way out. It was the standard packing a delivery man would use, cardboard, large but relatively light. Still, he used the dolly to save his back. He'd learned years earlier that something didn't need to be heavy to cause injury. He made sure to keep his back stiff as he wheeled the large box into the shop and placed it on his workbench. "Here, Benny." Evelyn offered a pair of scissors. With a swipe of the blades along the middle and both edges, the box opened, revealing what seemed to be a mostly empty package filled with loose newspapers. Bernard pulled at the crumpled sheets and tossed them aside as Evelyn began picking up the loose trash and collecting them into a trash bag. At the bottom, he found a smaller box about 1 foot square with more papers tightly secured to it with twine keeping it in place. Whatever this was, Archie wanted it protected. Bernard picked it up and brought it to his work table behind the counter while Evelyn fought with Molly over a piece of paper from the New York Times. "Molly, be a good girl and let go. This is trash, not a toy," Evelyn ordered as she distracted Molly by placing a hand in the side pocket of her dress. "Would you like a treat?" To that, Molly promptly released her hold. With a hop of her front legs and a nod of her head, the dog gave a soft yelp. "Here you go," Evelyn said, giving her the proffered bounty. "You know that she can't have too many of those." "I'll have to deal with the gastronomical effects," Bernard commented as he inspected the twine. "I know," Evelyn said with a smile. He shook his head, pulling out a pocket knife he used to cut through the restraints. He cut through some clear tape, carefully unraveling the package while Evelyn cleaned the mess he'd made. "Evie, don't worry about that. I'll get it later," he said. "Sure you will. It'll be here the next time I come by," she protested. Inside sat the small box, colorful with some figures on 2 sides and 1 on top. He looked at it for several seconds again, trying to determine Archie's angle. What was this thing? An oversized paperweight. Where was the joke? The real reason this was sitting in front of him? "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "I'm not sure. Some kind of box." "Oh, that's nice." Evelyn threw another piece of trash away as she walked over. "Oh, my, that is beautiful. It's an art piece." Bernard looked up at her and then back at it. "Art?" he questioned. Evelyn nodded. "You put it on a shelf and look at it. Let me see where you might put it." She began inspecting the place to decide where it would go. "I'd say at your front window so people passing by can see it, but you usually keep the blinds closed. Another reason business is not booming, I'd say, but if there, you wouldn't get to see it. It needs to be somewhere you'll be able to appreciate it." "Oh, I know where it might go," she said with a flurry as she climbed back up the stairs to his apartment. He could hear her mumbling as she continued her evaluation. "No, not here. Or there, either." More confused than ever, he began to spin it around. He knocked a knuckle against it and listened. It didn't sound like wood or metal and gave a thud as if it were hollow. "Art?" he asked himself. "Evie, come down from there. I'm not going to put it anywhere. This is a trick. Can't you see?" "A trick, really." "Or maybe it was stolen." "Why would he give you something he stole?" "So, I'd get caught with it and sent to prison." "Really?" Evelyn asked. "You really think he would send you a beautiful work of stolen art just on the off chance you'd be caught with it at some undetermined time in the future, and you'd be sent to prison?" Evelyn stared at Bernard. Bernard stared at Evelyn. "Highly unlikely," Evelyn said as she picked up her purse. "I think you should clear a space on your bookshelf. It's where you spend most of your time anyway." "Well, I'll be leaving soon. I've got supper to cook for Clifford, and I heard that a storm is coming. Might be a cold one. Make sure you bring in some firewood, okay?" she said as she went to the box the lawyer had left on the front porch, which Molly was beginning to chew on. "Oh, there's something else in here." Bernard walked over to see Evelyn reaching in. "Hold on, Evie. Let me see." He rushed to the box and reached it just as Evelyn was pulling something out. "Evie, stop," Bernard sternly ordered as he yanked a book out of her hands. Bernard extended the book away from both of them to be safe, then slowly walked back to his workbench with it. "Really, you need to listen to me. There's no telling what this is." It wasn't until he placed the book on the surface and opened the cover that he realized Evelyn wasn't near him. He looked up to see her, face flushed, staring at him. I should probably just throw it all away, he said, feeling sheepish at his actions towards her. Evelyn remained silent. He continued, "The art. There's probably something wrong with it. Maybe it's—" "Bernard, stop." He knew that tone. She was upset, and he knew it was his fault. "You need to grow up. Have you ever thought that maybe he wanted to make amends?" Bernard wanted to ignore her. He turned away and stroked Molly's head. "You don't know him," Bernard said. "A lifetime of not speaking is a great way to get to know someone, is it?" Evelyn paused and let out a deep breath before continuing. "It's nice that he left you something. You should respect his final wishes." "Like you respect my wish of you minding your own business?" He grumbled, then scrunched his nose at an uncomfortable smell. Molly's stomach was already revolting to Evelyn's treats. She shook her head slowly as she glared at him. Why did he say that? Why was he so defensive? She didn't do anything wrong. "You're a stubborn man. I'm praying for your soul," she said as she stepped through the front door and paused. "You really need to learn to be nicer." She turned to leave, but stopped again, letting out a sigh. "If the storm does get bad, don't stay here. Come over. Clifford and I would be happy to have you." Bernard didn't know what to say. It wasn't the first time, and probably wouldn't be the last time he hurt her feelings, and she responded with nothing but kindness. He watched her as she stepped down to the cobblestone road to head home. He peeked out his front door onto the porch. The rain was lightly drizzling. Evelyn, being the intelligent woman she was, had an umbrella out. He watched it bob from side to side until she disappeared along the curve of the road. The rain would turn to snow soon. Bernard could feel the bite of coldness in the air. It made him recall Evelyn's offer, but he knew he wouldn't go to her and her husband. No need to be a third wheel when he could hold up here. At his desk, he opened the book's cover and saw that it was a journal filled with information. Diamond fire. The smell of Molly pulled him back. He hobbled to the rear of the shop and let her out the back door so she could do her business. While he waited, he couldn't help but think of Archie's box on his workbench and had to admit that it didn't make sense. So far, there was no hint of it being anything more than what it was. Could it be simply a gift? At first glance, he thought it must have been some cruel joke, but now that a bit of time had passed, he thought maybe not. Molly barked. "All done?" Molly nudged against his knee as she walked in from the wetness outside, her way of showing affection. He caught a glimpse of mist on his breath as he closed the door and was happy that he'd brought in plenty of firewood the previous weekend. Back inside, he continued to inspect the box. Its corners weren't square, but rounded into nice small curves. Everything seemed of the utmost quality, with an element of elegance to the design. He could easily spin it on the bench, which made it well balanced. It didn't wobble with the turns. It measured to be exactly 1 foot in every direction, making it a perfect square. Although it was tan like wood, it felt a little like a metal of some kind, with several grooves and indentations covering its surface. Content that the box was nothing more than art, as Evelyn stated, or at least that it wasn't imposing any danger, Bernard turned to the journal. It was dated March 3rd, 1899. He opened the cover and read the first entry. "I have decided to document my journey. The box has proved to be elusive in understanding its origin or history. There is no mention of it within any records that I've been able to find. I hope that with this journal I will be able to establish baselines so I can see a more profound truth in what the box is about, who made it, and how it ended up with me." Bernard decided to skim through the journal to get a feel for what was in it. He found results from experiments Archie had performed, from X-ray to magnetic resonance testing. Archie even tried taking a sample from the box, but discovered it wasn't possible. He couldn't chip it, not even by hitting it with a hammer or a spike. Bernard inspected the box thoroughly and found no scarring, scratches, or indications that it was anything but handled with the best of care. He found notes dated just a few years after Archie and Gwen married and went all the way to the present. Archie had been obsessing over the box his entire life. Bernard nodded to himself. It was like Arch to obsess over something and stubbornly hit his head against it, never stopping, never admitting defeat, even with the identification of a random work of art. From the looks of it, Archie kept meticulous documentation. He spent thousands of dollars on tests and specialists traveling to him to evaluate it. He wouldn't let the box out of his sight for fear that someone would take it, but every attempt ended with the box being more mysterious than when he started. Any type of scan led to nothing but hazy blankness. All results indicated that the box was empty. Bernard agreed. It was light, very light, which meant nothing was probably inside of it. He should dismiss the entire effort, the journal, and even could be convinced that the gift was nothing more than a joke from Archie, but the box had already drawn him in. Bernard couldn't explain how it was made or what it was made of. The colors were vibrant for it being older than 60 years. He went into his toolbox and returned with a hammer. Gently at first, but soon more forcefully, he slammed the hammer onto the box to find that it bounced off, leaving no trace of the encounter. His hand tingled from the vibration as if the energy he put into the swing had directly pushed back into his hand and arm. He turned back to the journal to glean more insight. If the mystery of the box wasn't enough, it haunts me of how it came into my life. No one ever claimed ownership of it. It was as if it appeared out of nowhere. I remember Gwen pulling it out of the pile of gifts the week following our wedding. If I had known the torment I would endure for so many years, I may have thrown it away then. No, I don't think I would have. There is something about it that lures me. It tempts me to study it. I don't know what it is, but I will find out the truth. It was a wedding gift. His heart turned, and he tried not to think about the idea of Archie being with Gwen, marrying her when it should have been him. Those gifts, this box should have been his. Bernard paused, went to his kitchen, and heated up some leftover Salisbury steak from a diner he'd eaten a few days earlier. He needed to process. He took the journal to his recliner to look at it in between bites. One particular entry caught his attention. My leading theory is that the box is based on some ancient design dealing with the theme of diamond fire. This is the manner in which light passes through diamonds. It disperses into rainbow colors when passing through the diamond. This is why the man on one side worships the flame representing light, the other admires the diamond, and the third man on top uses the two together. I have run every known test dealing with light in the box, and I know there must be some truth to this, but to date I have failed to unearth its secret. Soon Bernard realized that Archie had recently added notes to him in his journal. It must have been when he knew he was going to die. Archie was smart. There is no way Bernard would have listened to anything Archie had to say while he was alive. Bernard was looking at a test result from a magnetometer showing squiggly lines that he had no idea how to interpret. Below the lines, the tech wrote, "The device emits a magnetic field, and one strong enough to be noticeable by many types of sensors. However, the results we get from those sensors do not agree with each other. We cannot seem to get a consistent reading from the box, no matter how we conduct the test." Bernard had no idea what the lines meant or what the problem seemed to be, but he understood false outputs. The machine couldn't do what it was meant to do. He knew that much. To the side, a note was addressed to him. "Bernard, in case you don't know how to read this, this result of several tests we performed after the magnetometer evaluation suggests to us that the box isn't made of wood or any kind of commonly known metal. We ran the tests a dozen times, producing the same effects each time. My theory is that it has its own magnetic force and shifts its magnetic field at times, but I do not know how or why." Molly found her way to Bernard's feet, pleading for a bite of steak. He cut a piece off, tossed it into the air, and she, quick on her feet, snapped it up. "Good girl. What do you think? Some kind of strange metal?" he asked her as he thought about the box. He often talked to Molly. He usually did it to help work through problems. If it has its own magnetic force, then perhaps, he trailed off in thought. Molly barked for another treat. Bernard looked at her. "If I give you another, will you be a good girl and settle down?" He knew she'd only continue to ask for more until the plate was clean. He didn't mind. It was more of a ritual than a firm request. Molly's eyes affirmed she'd be the best dog there ever was. Bernard nodded, then placed the rest of the steak on the floor. Molly lapped up the meat, spending some extra time licking the gravy from the floor as Bernard walked to the kitchen sink to clean the plate. Once clean, he placed it into the drain and walked downstairs to muddle over his thoughts. If the box had some kind of magnetic force inside of it, Molly was back at his feet for more. He ignored her nudges and waved her off. Then it would theoretically interfere with the Earth's magnetic forces, and if that's true, Bernard pondered the thought as his mind drifted toward an idea. "That's it, Molly," Bernard shouted. Molly came in, looking for more food, then glancing about to discover what triggered the excitement. Bernard ignored her as he went downstairs and started rummaging in his toolbox. He pulled out his compass and made his way back to the box. As he drew near, the needlepoint shifted from true north to the box. He backed up, and the needle responded by returning to its original position. Then it turned back towards the box as he stepped closer. He circled the box, and as he moved, the needle oriented towards it. He wondered if Archie had thought to use a compass. Nothing in the journal talked about testing its magnetism with a compass. He took a sense of pride, knowing that he came up with something that all of Archie's money and efforts couldn't, all in a single afternoon. He wasn't sure what to do with this knowledge, but it confirmed that the box was strange, and he could feel himself being convinced that this was a genuine mystery. He was hooked. The clock showed 9 p.m. He'd been going through the journal for more than 7 hours as he lost himself in the notes and the layers of possible meanings behind the ramblings of Archie. It was the first time an interesting problem had grabbed hold of him in a long time, and it excited him. In that respect, he was like Archie. Before turning in, he decided to flip the page one more time and found a folded letter. Not a note, but a letter in a female's handwriting. It seemed out of place and didn't have Archie's notes he'd come to expect. The letter started mid-sentence, so for some reason Archie wanted him to read this page from what was likely a longer collection of pages. The first entry was from Gwen. "Hurt me for the last time. I can't stand how you isolate yourself in your office, staying in there for days on end. I have put up with your obsession all these years because you provide for our family, for our kids and grandkids. But there is something I need to tell you. I don't love you anymore." Bernard stopped reading. He looked about, almost ashamed to be reading such a private exchange between Gwen and Archie. He wanted to read it to discover what had gone wrong, but he didn't. He couldn't. He folded it and set it aside. The idea of reading something from Gwen, hearing her voice in his head, was too much. It hurt too much. No, he'd set that aside for now and focus on the box. A Heart Flinched. Bernard quickly began to puzzle the past as the minutes turned to hours. The deeper he went, the more it was clear that Archie spent a not-so-small chunk of his total wealth investigating what he often referred to as the Lockless Box. At one point he flew to Princeton, New Jersey, to meet with none other than Albert Einstein himself after sending him the test results he'd collected at the time. It would appear that the most brilliant mind on the planet was left confused by what Einstein called the spooky artifact. He pleaded with Archie to leave the box for further investigation, but to Einstein's dismay, Archie couldn't part with it, so he returned home to continue his pursuit. Bernard found another note addressed to him from Archie. "My visit with Mr. Einstein wasn't fruitless. He discovered something new in his testing that might convince you of the extraordinary nature of its abilities. Establish a perfectly level surface, place bearings at various points throughout the surface, and move the box to different points without interacting with the surface or the bearings. To say more would be to spoil the experiment. Einstein also warned me of revealing too much to people attempting to discover the artifact's base properties. He stated that observing always affects the observed, so it's critical to eliminate any and all possible false assumptions through improper communication. I will add that this effect works with more than bearings. It turns out, as it does with magnetic forces, it also appears to affect gravity." "Gravity?" Bernard said. Molly's ears perked. He leaned to the side of his recliner and scratched behind her ear. He pulled himself up and made his way downstairs into his shop to test out this latest piece of information. Leveling one of his workbenches wasn't difficult, but it took him several minutes to find bearings. Ultimately, he had to dismantle a lazy Susan from his upstairs apartment to get the bearings. The back and forth up and down the stairs hurt his knees and back, but he pushed through the arthritis. Using small pieces of wood as shims and his trusty bubble level, he worked the table until all angles showed the bubble at the center between the two lines. He then placed the bearings, 34 in all, around the table, and as a testimony to his leveling job, they all remained still. Satisfied that everything was in place, he took the box and placed it in an empty spot on the table to one side. The second the box touched the tabletop, all the bearings within 3 feet started rolling toward it. He picked the box off the table and watched as the bearings slowed their roll to a stop. He moved to a different spot, and again, just as the box made contact with the table, the small metal balls started heading in the new direction. He left the box at the spot, and in a matter of seconds, all 34 bearings had surrounded the box. Bernard was beside himself. It clearly had its own magnetic field, but for what purpose? On a hunch, he picked up one of the bearings and slowly rolled it parallel to one side. He noticed that it began to curve, looping twice until it rested against one of the sides of the box. Bernard stood. "What in the—" Molly, curious about what her master was looking at, lifted her front paws onto the edge of the table. The action caused the table to fall off the shims on that side, creating a lean to the surface. The bearings remained fixed to the box. He wondered why they did so. They should have started rolling toward the lowest point, but didn't. He took a bearing and dropped it downhill of the box. The bearing immediately started moving to the box. He lifted one side of the table to create a steeper incline and found the bearing still rolled uphill to the box. The effect was neutralized once the angle was more than an inch, but at that point the bearings didn't roll away. They remained at their spot, only rolling off the table when he tilted the table further. He then decided to test Archie's claim that it worked with other things. He poured some beer from a nearby can that Evelyn had missed from her last visit. As soon as the box touched the table, the liquid drained towards it. Bernard was able to increase the tilt further with a liquid. Perhaps there was less surface resistance than the bearings. Just like all the other strange behaviors of the box, he wasn't sure what to do with the knowledge. Something about the box not only manipulated magnetism, but also had a form of gravitational pull, which could, to a degree, resist Earth's gravity. He drank the last of the beer from the can, cringed a bit from the flatness of it, then placed it on a nearby shelf. He paused after thinking about Evelyn, and instead picked it up and threw it into the trash can, then decided to rest before continuing with his efforts. Bernard often had lucid dreams, and although he could never influence their outcome, he often tried. This one was particularly surreal. 3 graves sat before him, the middle unfilled and exposed to the crisp night air with a pile of dirt nearby. The tomb to the left read Archibald Emerson, and to the right of the grave, Gwen Emerson. The center tombstone had no name, just a statement. Here lays a life wasted. He slowly stepped closer. Peering inside, he saw himself lying at the bottom of the hole. He couldn't bear to see himself down there and screamed as the nearby mound of dirt slowly cascaded into his grave and over the lifeless body. A sense of pressure overcame him, as if he was down there with the weight of the dirt pressing him down, deeper into the ground. He tried, but couldn't move to stop the avalanche. He turned away and saw the box. The 3 ancient figures from the box were dancing, singing melodic notes of a strange language. "Help me," he called out to them, but they ignored him. He focused on the box as the men faded into darkness. A bright light shone over both it and him. The box flashed, and when Bernard regained sight, he saw it was now a window. A chill came over him as he saw himself in a field through the window's opening, Molly chasing after butterflies. He wanted that. He felt a tremendous urge to go to the window, to climb through it and meet that other version of himself. He stepped towards the box, but something grabbed hold of his ankle. He looked down and saw a hand. It was his hand. The version of himself in the grave had crawled out through the dirt and was pulling at him. "No, get off of me," he yelled as he kicked at the wrist. Just as he broke free, 2 more hands grabbed him. Decayed and dried-up versions of Archie and Gwen had joined in. The 3 were clawing at him, pulling on him. "I don't want to go. Let me free," he yelled with no success. Soon he was scratching at the ground, being pulled further away from the window toward the grave. Just as his waist sank through the loose dirt, he managed a final glimpse of the window and beyond. Then, with one fell swoop, he was pulled under. Bernard gasped for air as he woke from the horrible dream. His chest constricted. For a brief moment, he thought he was having a heart attack. He massaged it and took some deep breaths to settle his mind. A vague thought came to him, and he rushed to Archie's notes, checking every page and along the side of one of the sheets, but there was nothing about dreams. He felt an uneasy sensation overtake him. He had the notion that the day had turned to night, then day again. Focusing on the journal and the box, and then researching what he could through his library, took his full attention. Bernard quickly became obsessed over the journal, trying to glean every morsel of information. Had it been 1 day, or was it 2? He'd taken several naps, but never really made it to bed, and subsequently had lost track of time. He was fixing tea when he realized the hour. It was almost noon, and if 2 days had passed, then Evelyn would be returning to deliver food and do her usual cleanup. He looked around, and the place was in complete disarray. Notes were taped on the walls, connecting different sheets from the journal to each other to better understand Archie's thinking. There was no way he'd be letting her inside. She'd blow her top, as the kids say. Rushing down the stairs, he glanced through the shop window to see that she was down the road, walking up with 2 plastic bags hanging around her wrist. He quickly pulled the blinds down and locked the door just as she stepped onto the front porch. He sat, waiting to see what she'd do. At first the steps on the porch grew louder, then the handle rattled. Evelyn tapped twice on the glass. "Benny, are you in there?" Wait, I know you're in there." You never leave." "Benny, come to the door." Bernard held his breath as if letting the air out of his lungs would give himself away. "I know you're in there," she exclaimed. He started to shift away from the wall to crawl deeper into his shop. "Benny, I can see you through the crack in the blinds. Come open the door." Bernard quickly shoveled around the desk and sat for a second. "Evelyn, I'm busy. I don't have time to visit with you today. Okay? I've got important things to do. I was just coming to check on you and let you know that Clifford set up Big Bertha, so we'll be good with power through the storm. It's coming soon. Maybe tonight, and it would be better for me if I knew you were safe." Big Bertha was a generator Clifford had set up for them. She continued, "We have plenty of wood for the fire, and we'd love it if you came over until the storm passes. If you were to come out, you could see that the wind has picked up." He could hear the slight tremors of the wind rattling the front side windows of his shop. Part of him wanted to let her in, to explain everything to her, but If he did, she'd think he lost his mind with the state of things, which would trigger an argument he wasn't prepared to have. I'll be fine. I have plenty of firewood and food. I'll be okay.
Silence.
He peeked around and found she was leaning into the front window, trying to see through. He shuffled behind his work table before continuing, "Really, I'm good. Thanks for coming, but I really need to get back to work. I've got a big client that needs my full attention." "Oh, work, is it?" More silence. The kind of silence that makes seconds feel like hours. "Benny, you really need to let me in. This isn't right. You locking yourself in like this. This isn't like you. Come and let me in." Bernard could hear her pulling at a window. Luckily, they hadn't been open for more than a decade. The paint alone would keep them shut, but the notion that she wouldn't respect his wishes frustrated him. Something deep within his soul made him feel ashamed and needed to be alone. "Evelyn, I don't see how this is any of your business, so please go." His heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her to say something or walk away. She took 2 steps back, but returned to the door with a powerful pound. "Bernard Arthur Robinson, I have come here for more years than I care to admit, and you only grow more stubborn. I've tried to show you compassion because Father Robert tells me it's what a good Catholic woman should do. Yes, I talk about you in confession, where I confess to wanting to do things that aren't ladylike to you." She paused. "I feel sorry for you. I'm your friend. I've always been here for you, even before I married Clifford. I liked you. You will always have a special place in my heart, Bernard, but I don't think I can keep doing this." A few seconds passed before her somber, quiet tone continued. "Do I matter to you at all?" she pleaded. Her voice cracked, and he could feel that familiar, sinking feeling deep inside himself. The part that he worked hard for years to shut away. He vowed to never let it out, to never let anyone back in. Bernard leaned around the edge to see if she'd left after she hadn't spoken for several seconds. She continued. This time, her voice carried the sound of sympathy. He could tell she was crying. "I just want you to realize that there is a big, bold world out here. A life that you're missing out on. You've got to get out of this place, or you'll die in there, locked up in your shop. This isn't how you want to live your life, Benny." He found that he was tearing up and hated that he was like this. Unable to let anyone in. He was hurting. She was hurting, and no matter what he felt, he couldn't bring himself to unlock the door. Another pounding on the door, weaker than before. Her voice was stern with resolve. "A part of me wishes that one day, a pause. One day I'll come here to check on you, and you'll just be gone. Not dead, but gone. You'll finally listen to this hag of a woman and decided to go out and see what's beyond these 4 walls. Really see, not just down to the grocery store." Another pause. A longer one, and just as Bernard was about to check outside. "I can't stay here any longer, but if you change your mind, come over and stay warm with us." The creaking of the wooden planks told him that she was leaving for real this time. He took a moment to ensure she'd gone, then went to the front door. 2 plastic bags filled with sandwiches, medicine, and some chips that were Bernard's favorites sat next to a large container of lemonade, also his favorite. Something deep inside of his mind caused his heart to flinch. He didn't know why he couldn't have let her in, why he felt the need to push people away. Tears began to blur his vision. Into the fire. Frustration and shame enshrouded him like a cloak woven from dark dreams, a sensation he'd come to know intimately over the years. Yet, now it struck deeper, perhaps due to Archie's demise or the yet unread letter. Gwen was a specter he couldn't face. His melancholy twisted, transmuting into a keen anger that gnawed at the corners of his soul as he pondered the missteps of his life and his penchant for pushing others away. Bernard, beset by loneliness and despair, cradled Evelyn's tender gifts with the reverence of a sacred relic. His ire swelled, a tempest aimed at the choices that led him to this solitude. He realized that laboring relentlessly would not grant him solace nor joy. He found himself in his work area, the enigmatic box at the center of a vortex of papers and notes. The chaos struck him as childish, and he questioned his fixation on this arcane puzzle. Could this box be Archie's malevolent parting gift, designed to unravel his sanity? Resolute, he vowed to reach out to Evelyn. The ghost of Archie's postscript haunted him, a warning against the box's insidious influence. Steeled with determination, Bernard swept the scattered papers aside and hurled the box into the hungry flames. Should it shatter, its secrets would be laid bare. The fire surged, and tendrils of smoke danced on the ceiling. Animated with an energy long forgotten, Bernard ascended to the 2nd floor, sensing the storm's approach. He prepared a bag for himself, and Molly disconnected appliances and extinguished the lights downstairs. It was time to break free from the chains of the past. "Molly!" he called out. At first, He wasn't sure where she was, and he heard her barking, and not in the exciting way that she usually did when they were planning on leaving the shop, but when she was defending herself from another dog or something that frightened her. "Molly, what's wrong?" he asked as he hurried the best he could down the stairs towards the fireplace. She was barking at the fire, nipping at it and jumping back. He drew closer, only to pause when he thought he heard something. A vibration like the buzzing of a fly, but it was coming from the fireplace. "Do you hear something, girl?" He studied the fire, then the box, and felt confident the sound was coming from it. Through the crackling of the wood, he listened as the box emitted a sound. He reached in to feel the box, but wasn't careful enough to avoid the side of the fire pit. The hot metal edging burned his right arm as he cried out. Molly jumped back and then drew closer to him, showing her sympathy. He ignored the pain as he grabbed a metal rod that he often used to stoke the fire and pushed the box to the side. The sun didn't change, but he noticed some bright red markings around the backside of the box, the hotter side. At first he thought the box was on fire, but no, bright flames seemed to glisten on the surface, shifting from darker, deep reds to bright oranges. Bernard knew they were organized, detailed markings, almost like writing. They faded from the natural brown surface of the box into multiple rows of distinct markings. They were small, but using a magnifying glass, he could clearly make them out. He wondered if the box had some chemical that reacted to the heat, revealing the markings. Bernard couldn't imagine what type of compound would endure all the tests Archie had run on it. He coaxed the box around, but the markings disappeared when the side with the writing was facing him. Leaning towards the side, he noticed the new backside of the box displayed more of the strange language. It appeared to him that when it was heated to a certain degree, it illuminated writing. He wrote the first section that he could see without turning, then proceeded to shift the box to illuminate more writing until he'd made a full turn. Satisfied that he documented everything he could, he used the poker to spread the coals and let the fire die before nudging the box closer to the edge. He carefully touched the box to find that it wasn't radiating any heat. He felt more of it, and the box felt like the fire wasn't affecting it all. With the box back on the workbench, he rewrote all the markings on paper, larger this time to get a better feel for their structure. He then started searching through his library for any indication of meaning. With the storm outside, it'll be a time before he could make it to the library, so he'd have to make do. The markings did appear to be half of some type of lettering, but it was completely foreign to him. He tried drawing the bottom half, creating letters, but it made no sense. He remembered his youth when he went through a season of studying languages. He could tell the symbols were not Hebrew, but if the box was old, it had to be an ancient language. He was sure it wasn't English, and he had several books teaching the Romantic languages, but sadly none were helpful. The pattern had hints of continuity with the curves of the markings, but Bernard felt if it was some strange writing, it was unlike any language he'd ever seen. A cold revelation. Bernard was beside himself. He'd watched the box for several minutes to see if it would do anything different, but it sat there just as before since the lawyer brought it to him. It was unchanged and unscathed from its time in the fire. It wasn't until after several thoughtful hours that he realized he could reproduce the fire effect by using a cutting torch that he kept in his shed in the back. It was a torch he used when a safe's lock was malfunctioning and couldn't be picked. The snow had picked up and the lights flickered as he searched his mind for some way to piece together the new information. He scoured every inch of Archie's journal, and there was no mention of lettering, so he felt confident that this was new territory, but what did it mean? Were the letters some lost language? He stared at the box, and then the rows of letters written horizontally on loose sheets of paper. There were 2 rows that covered the length of his 4-foot table from left to right. He even tried his best to space the distance between the rows as they were on the box. The space between the rows was about a half-inch. Something told him that the spacing was essential, but he didn't know why. Like an annoying itch, he couldn't scratch in the back of his mind. He searched his thoughts as the storm rattled the windows throughout the house. Molly barked from the back, her usual call to let him know she needed to go out. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow was falling, and he looked down at her questioningly. "You sure?" Molly pushed against the door, opening it an inch. "Okay." He let her out, but the box never left his mind. The 3 men were still there, the one with a diamond above, the other with a flame, and the third with both a diamond and flame. There must have been some credence to Archie's diamond fire idea, but he'd run every possible test dealing with lights Bernard could think of. He felt that particular idea was a rabbit trail. After letting Molly back in, he returned to the journal to study the sheets on the walls and all the loose notes Archie had collected over the years. After finding nothing new, he had to confront the notion that perhaps something was in the personal letters between Archie and Gwen. There was a chance that some piece of information, however slim, could shed some light on this box. He still couldn't bring himself to read it, not yet. The ache in his arm began to throb more aggressively. The nerves from the burn were pulsating, and the salve he used wasn't helping soothe the pain. He was tired and hungry. He hadn't eaten much in the last couple of days and remembered the meal Evelyn had left on the front porch. He'd already eaten one sandwich, so he grabbed the second one. The bread would be a bit soggy, but he wouldn't mind. He pulled the last of the lemonade from the refrigerator. With some luck, taking a break to get food and drink might clear his head. For several minutes, Bernard sat staring at the three men on the box, eating his food and drinking his lemonade. He'd even put some ice cubes in the lemonade because the fire had warmed up the shop. He studied the spooky artifact as he leaned back in his chair to ponder his new findings when a massive crash came from upstairs. A tree must have fallen in the backyard and broken through the shutter. The snow began to swirl into the room from the back of his shop. Molly did the only thing she could do. She barked and leapt about excitedly. He rushed to close the window, but found he didn't have anything nearby. He grabbed a blanket and tacked it up around the window as a temporary stopgap. The cold was quickly overtaking his space, so he rushed outside to bring in some boards he was going to use during the summer to build a garden. He nailed the wood against the window frame and sealed it off. Cleaning the mess took longer than the repairs, but the distraction was good. He looked around but couldn't find Molly. Further investigation found she was lying next to the fire, keeping warm. "You're the smart one, Molly." Molly glanced up at the mention of her name, yawned, then laid her head back down. It was when he returned to his chair in the box that the pain in his arm returned. He hated the feeling of burns. He took the glass of lemonade and pressed it against the injury, letting out a sigh of relief. He then took an ice cube out and massaged the blistering skin, circling it at first and then rubbing gently over the entire area. Once one cube melted, he grabbed a second and a third as he pondered the box, the flame, and the diamond. Only when he picked up the third cube he realized what had been gnawing at his mind. The thought crystallized when he glanced from the cube to the diamond. There was another interpretation of what could be the diamond. One could say that it was ice, fire and ice, two opposites. The realization caused him to stumble out of his chair and pace back and forth around the table. He was excited and felt that he was closer than ever to the end of the mystery. Ice and fire. Fire and ice. That had to be it. Bernard wrapped his arm with a fresh bandage and then proceeded to take the box to his freezer. He sat and waited, quietly thinking to himself, "Archie, you had it wrong this whole time." Letters of ice. Bernard tapped at the freezer door while he waited. He glanced at the clock to see that it was almost midnight. The storm was raging outside. He'd turned the freezer's thermostat as low as possible, but the box didn't produce anything. He knew he was onto something. The thermostat read -20 degrees, but perhaps it wasn't cold enough. The box needed to be colder, and Molly was calling out to him to go outside again. "Molly, you don't want to go. You went earlier, and it's dangerous out there." Dangerous and cold, he thought. He'd known storms like this to get below zero, maybe even below -20. Molly shot into the kitchen after a massive rumble shook the house. "It'll be all right. We're safe here, nice and warm," Bernard said as he stroked her neck and back. "It's pretty rare to have thunder in a snowstorm," he added. Bernard tried to push the idea of the thunder out of his mind. It was something he'd heard happened but had never experienced. Another bright flash and rumble shot through the house, much louder than before. Both he and Molly dropped to the floor in fear. When the shaking stopped, Bernard opened his eyes and found that the electricity had gone out. He went to the breaker box, but none of the breakers had flipped. It meant the power problem was further down the line. It wasn't something he could fix. He'd have to wait until the power company dealt with it. For now, he and Molly would need to huddle inside and keep warm near the fireplace. He was grateful the furnace was gas, and together with the fire, they'd be able to stay warm. He lit some candles and placed them around the shop before returning to the freezer and the box. Without power, it would never get cold enough. He rummaged through his drawers until he found a thermostat and placed it outside his back door. A tree had fallen from the neighbor's backyard. The fence was broken in two places, and most of what he could see was snow blowing through the downed branches. It didn't take long for the mercury level to quickly pass below zero, then -10, sunk past 30, and hit bottom at -40. That was good enough for him. Taking care to put on several layers, Bernard took the box and brought it outside. He had to lean into the wind and brace against the cold, which quickly became too much to handle. He rushed to a small table that would pick the box up high enough for him to see from inside, placed the box on it, then quickly scrambled back into his shop. He had to open one of the shutters and screw it open to keep it from slamming against the window. He watched and waited, but the storm was too bad. It wasn't long before the box was hidden in the falling snow, swirling around. He decided to layer up more, putting on his thickest gloves and goggles before going out to get a closer look. Molly peered at him through the glass of the doorway, her breath clouding the thin surface. As he edged closer, he didn't see much. At first, he thought the wind must have picked the box up and into the sky, but the snow had already covered it. He cleaned the snow off the table and immediately saw bright blue lettering glimmering on the box. Similar markings as the fire letters in 2 rows just as before, but this time they were just below the location of the fire letters. Bernard was sure of it. They were halves of whole letters. He located the same section on the box he started with from the fire letters and wrote down those markings. Once inside, Molly's feet kept tapping away around him as she fed off of his growing excitement. "Yes, girl, we're getting close," he said quickly, taking the 2 lines and merging them on a new sheet of paper. Bernard warmed up the best he could from the fire before forcing himself into the cold again. He pushed through the shivering of his fingers as he strained through the laborious task of documenting the markings by writing them down on pieces of paper. He couldn't bring the box back in, or the letters would disappear, so he continued to go back and forth, being careful to write each mark as accurately as possible. The fire and ice letters were halves of the same lines. Separately, they meant nothing, but together they formed something meaningful. Bernard didn't know what yet, but he was sure he'd be able to find out at the library or after making some calls once the storm passed. Eventually, he'd be able to get it translated and hopefully discover all of the box's secrets. Then he could finally feel like he bested Archie. It felt good to have reached this far. A measure of peace had settled in his soul. He sat and stared at what he'd created. The writing still made no sense, but he could tell it was clearly a language, and part of him found it familiar, but he couldn't place it. With all that had happened, his eyes grew heavy. He'd gone too long without sleeping, and the recent events were taking their toll. All at once, he laid his head on the table and closed his eyes, committing to rest for a moment before he'd get back to the mystery of the Lockless Box. Unveiling Justice. Bernard stood, his knees creaking from the dirge of age, caught in the heart of what seemed a forgotten counsel as old as time itself. A shaft of light pierced the gloom, casting a paleness upon the place where he stood, spilling enough to reveal a towering pedestal some distance before him. Upon its cold surface the Lockless Box silently rested. To his right, the 3 men from his last dream lingered like specters, each with distinct features. One tall and gaunt, another with a weathered face and deep-set eyes, and the third a broad-shouldered figure with a commanding presence, their eyes brimming with judgment and wonder. From the embrace of darkness, Evelyn's voice emerged, entreating mercy. Pray consider the life he might yet live, and grant him the opportunity for redemption. She pleaded, her voice a wellspring of compassion as she stepped into the light. A large thud bellowed, and then words began to materialize before Bernard's eyes, shimmering as if written in golden ink. He strained to decipher them. His name adorned the top, followed by a litany of accolades. Loving husband to Evelyn, doting father of 4 and grandfather to a dozen, a bastion of community, a proud military career, and a lodestar to myriad souls. He turned to Evelyn, his brow furrowed with bewilderment. "This is not me. I don't understand," he confessed, gesturing at the luminous list before him. Evelyn's eyes met his, filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. "Dear," she paused as if trying to fight off a weakness rising within her. "That's who you were meant to be." A solitary tear traced a path down her cheek as she retreated into the darkness, leaving Bernard in his solitude. Another voice, sharp and edgy, came from behind. "You were too weak to live that life." Gwen stepped into the light. She walked to the floating words, and with a wave of her hand, she wiped each accomplishment he had never made. "Your life is over," she said, as the letters dispersed into a cloud of golden smoke that began to dance. "You are but a shadow of the sands of time. They've slipped through your fingers like a grotesque apparition, haunting you with the echoes of your wasted existence." "No!" he yelled. With teary eyes, Bernard looked at where the list once was, his heart hurting. He felt the weight of wasted years. The countless times he had pushed Evelyn away, the moments he had neglected friends, and the opportunities to help his community that he had let slip through his fingers. Overwhelmed with regret, he admitted in a shaky voice, "I'm ready to love, ready to forgive." The 3 jurors began to speak in an unfamiliar language. The Lockless Box hummed a mournful, portentous note as though divining the very essence of Bernard's soul. He could feel it tugging as if it was ready to leave his body. A bright light burst from his chest and shot out toward the box in front of him. The tug increased, physically locking him into place. Words of a strange language coalesced around him, their hues of blues, oranges, and reds cavorting like a celestial dance. They were the markings from the box. He recognized them. He glanced down and fought against the pain, against the pressure, and one hand over the other, he used all his strength to grab onto the light leaving his body. He found that it was tangible. He pulled with all his might. At first it felt hopeless. "Stop! I can be better," Bernard cried, desperation carving itself upon his voice. As he pushed his strength to the limit, he felt the light give. After several agonizing minutes of pulling, it cracked in half and shot back to him, throwing him to the ground. Silence cloaked the chamber, and then, as if by ancient ritual, the three men began to sing in a haunting harmony that reverberated through the air. Their voices melded together, creating an ethereal melody that seemed to echo the sorrows of ages past. Meanwhile, a distant drum beat joined in, its deep, rhythmic pounding providing a steady, grounding pulse that contrasted with the otherworldly voices. The combination of the men singing and the drum beat enveloped the chamber. Getting to his feet, Bernard noticed that the letters had somehow morphed into English. He concentrated, committing their forms to memory. He repeated them in his mind, his eyes awash with tears as the chamber's light from above intensified, forcing him to wince. His heart raced as the warmth of the light enveloped him, filling him with a sense of hope and renewal. As the light ebbed, Bernard found himself once more within the familiar confines of his shop, amidst the intricate keys and his time-worn workbench. His pulse still thrummed with the echo of the dream, or vision that had left a mark on his soul. He gazed around the shop with fresh eyes, imbued with a sense of purpose that wove a delicate web of meaning for the box and his role in opening it. He now knew what to do. A change of heart. As Bernard sat, a massive shudder vibrated the apartment above the shop. Molly whimpered at his feet. He worried that Evelyn's words were foreshadowing. He might never get out of this building, the prison of his life. He should have listened to her, unlocked the door, and embraced the conversation. That path would have meant he'd have been safe. He'd at least have power. He took a moment to think about the box, the journal, and the letters surrounding him. He knew he had a welcoming release to the puzzle, that is, the Lockless Box. Even if the mystery of the box's origins hadn't fully been answered, the fact that he unraveled this much brought him some peace, some sense of center. The storm wasn't letting up, and he and Molly were huddled next to the fire when he felt something sticking into his side. In the right inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out the letter he'd put away before, the letter he'd been avoiding. He opened it softly and began to read. It was several sheets of a long back and forth between Gwen and Archie. Most of it was about the typical family drama, but he paused when he saw his name, backed up a sentence or two, then reread it. He couldn't believe what he was reading. One entry from Archie writing to Gwen caught him by surprise. "I have honored your desires to raise our family on your terms, and I feel I've been a loyal husband. Throughout all of those years, a part of me has changed towards Bernard. When we were kids, he was my friend, and because of you, we fought. One thing led to another, and by the time I realized how trivial the reason for the fighting was, it was too late. I didn't know why we hated each other so badly. By then he wouldn't return my letters or agree to meet. He may be one of the only people who could understand what I'm going through." The pages, at first glance, seemed to be samples from letters they'd written to each other throughout their marriage. However, from the content Bernard had read, it appeared that Archie had only given Bernard the letters that pertained to him. Archie and Gwen fought over Bernard throughout their marriage because Archie wanted to end the rivalry, but Gwen seemed to be against it, although the letters didn't specify why. He felt he could see there was pain which caused Gwen to reject the proposal of a friendship. Archie was alluding to something, but never said it outright. Bernard couldn't help but feel hurt over Gwen's hatred toward him just because Archie wanted to reestablish their friendship. It didn't make sense. Molly leaned against him as he sat on the floor next to the fireplace, his body aching for sitting in an uncomfortable position too long. His heart had overtaken any physical pain he was feeling. She nosed his cheek and licked at a tear. "Come on, Molly. Enough of that," he said as he wiped it away. He took several deep breaths, trying to relax. He couldn't believe Gwen felt so harshly towards him, or why he gave her such an uneasy feeling. Archie was letting Bernard see a side of Gwen he hadn't known existed. He turned to another entry, this one from Gwen. "I try to take care of the family the best I can, but it's overwhelming. You tell me that we must write these letters because we can't talk about these things without our arguments getting out of hand. You might be correct, but all this does is make me sit in my room, weeping over all the mistakes I've made. You'd be better off without me. Sometimes when we argue, I don't feel like myself. I feel like some other woman takes over me, and I know you don't understand." Bernard was saddened at how Gwen portrayed her feelings and how she felt misunderstood. He'd always considered her and Archie to have a wonderfully happy marriage. He knew it wasn't all a bed of roses, but these entries painted a different picture of what he thought they had experienced. He skimmed through the rest of the entries and paused to read Archie's response. You are the mother of my children, and I will always love you, but I have decided that on this matter I will no longer abide by you controlling my life. Your insistence on everything being about money and giving Bernard something he doesn't deserve has created a wedge between us. I will reach out to Bernard. I'm old, and the friendship I lost has weighed heavily on my heart. I know we've argued about ways that I could reconnect with Bernard, and that is wholly due to my desire to build that bridge. I know you will not take to this kindly, but I must attempt to come to peace with my choices in life. I want to rekindle the friendship and go into business with him. I will be offering him half of the locksmith business. So it was about money. The topic they avoided over the months and years of writing was Gwen not wanting to let go of the business they had established. Bernard couldn't believe Archie wanted to go into business with him. He was willing to put his faith in a friendship he hadn't had against his marriage to Gwen. Bernard wondered if Archie struggled with a different demon his whole life, one perhaps that were cousins to his own. The letters grew darker still, then suddenly only one way. Gwen, it's been 2 weeks since I lost you. My heart is overwhelmed by my actions and how they affected you. I had no idea you were so tormented that you'd take your own life. I hate that I didn't see it, that I didn't do something, and most of all, that I pushed you away when you were weakest. I'm seeing a doctor that told me I should continue to write the letters, even if it would be one-sided moving forward. According to him, corresponding this way could still be helpful, so I promised to continue. Bernard withdrew from the letters. There were still dozens more, all dated after Gwen died. He reached up and found that he'd been crying and didn't want to stop. Molly placed her head in his hands as he wept. He mourned for the friendship he could have had at the end of Archie's life. He didn't fully understand why Gwen hated him so much, why she was focused on the money when now he knew he would have worked for free if it meant letting go of the heaviness that had been weighing him down for so long. Perhaps Gwen wouldn't have insisted he kept his distance if he wasn't so angry all the time. The tears turned to anger, but the emotions had no place to go, so he sat there, his heart pouring, releasing a lifetime of feelings that were now free, now able to flow through him in ways he was unfamiliar with but couldn't control. He didn't want to stop them. He was ready to let them out, to let them do whatever was necessary. More than ever, he felt dumbfounded at the notion that back then they let a woman come between them, and all these years later, money did the same. He couldn't blame Gwen or Archie. He hadn't made it easy on them to befriend him, and the thought tore at his gut. He wasn't sure how long it took to settle his mind enough to think clearly. His first coherent thought was how he deeply regretted the years lost and wished it would have been different. He wondered if the dream was correct, if the words he'd read were real or imagined by his own wishful thinking. At this rate, there was little left to lose. He'd proceed as if it were true and suffer the consequences. He wanted his high school best friend there by his side. That, of course, couldn't happen, so he did the only thing he could. He walked to the box, looked at it, pulled some paper out, and placed it on the box as a symbol of connection to Archie. He felt it was a way to tie his words to Archie and the gift that triggered all these emotions. He would have written on the box if he could, but the ink wouldn't show on the surface. Bernard wrote about his regrets and wishes, only pulling back to the present when he heard the familiar humming. He pushed the box away from his mind and continued expressing the desire for things to have gone differently. Lastly, he apologized for all the hate and words he said behind his friend's back. As the box trembled and the vibrations grew more intense, the house around Bernard shuddered and shook. The bold orange and blue lettering started to glow and seemed to be brighter, almost like a beacon calling out to him. Despite the chaos around him, Bernard remained focused, driven by a force deep within. Molly barked and yelped, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of noise. Despite the fear that clutched at his heart, Bernard stood firm, his resolve unwavering. Hands trembling, Bernard gripped his pen tightly and scrawled the final words of his letter, a testament to his commitment to the moment, for he was ready to face whatever the universe had in store for him. He wrote from his heart, I am sorry. Sorry for the way I treated you, for the hate I stored for you, for myself. Forgive me for a life that should have never been. I failed you, my friend. Tears streaking down his cheeks, he turned to the box. The letters were whole, not in halves. The words danced with blue and orange pulses as the box vibrated aggressively. A loud bolt of energy shot out, shattering the windows, cracking the foundation of his shop, and pushing him backwards to the ground. He strained to pull himself up to find the box floating 2 feet above his bench. Snow mixed with flames as they were pulled from the fireplace, fluttering around the box, then around him. He could hardly hear Molly's yelps. She began to tug at his pants with her teeth to pull him away. The flames, the wind, the snow, and the vibration seemed to harmonize as the humming increased to the point that forced Bernard to cup his ears. He could feel the pulsing of the box deep in his bones. Daring to glance, he watched as the box imploded into a dark, circular, man-sized hole. "Molly, it's some kind of portal," he yelled over the wind, rattling the windows. Molly retreated to the back of the shop and only came, tail tucked between her legs, after Bernard looked into it and through the opening. He could see a calm fall evening, an open field and mountains in the distance beyond a grove of trees. He could feel himself being pulled towards it, being drawn in. Bernard had a feeling of calm familiarity, and he knew at that moment he would cross over. He turned to Molly as the snow and flames continued to envelop the shop. "You don't have to come. You can stay. Evie can take care of you," he told her as he stepped toward it. Molly whimpered as she nudged against his legs and watched her master step towards the portal. Bernard paused, turned, then rushed to the letter he had written to Archie. He pinned it to the workbench to keep it from flying away and wrote one final line before returning to step in and through to the other side. Bernard turned back at the sound of Molly's bark, then watched her jump up and through after him. He scratched her chin. A thunderous roar bellowed through the opening. Bernard could see the room filling with a bright, pulsating light before the portal disappeared. Going on an adventure. "Evelyn, be careful." "Wait, let me do that," Clifford said. Evelyn pushed and pulled at the door as she pleaded for Bernard to respond. "Benny, are you there? Come to the door if you can hear my voice," she shouted. Soon Clifford managed to kick the door in enough for them to squeeze through the opening. Evelyn carefully stepped into the shop, then further beyond as she hoped to see Bernard alive, but felt as though she wouldn't. He'd be calling out to her. She knew he would. "Benny!" she yelled. No response. "Careful, Evelyn," Clifford cautioned. "It looks like the foundation cracked." A thick layer of snow covered most of the shop, but a large crack cut through the entire building's length. "Honey, can you check upstairs for me?" "Be careful," she asked. Her husband cautiously investigated upstairs as she looked around. She noticed the papers on the table first. They were soggy from the melting snow, but she could make out the writing through the smudges. It was some strange foreign language she wasn't familiar with. At the center of Benny's workbench, a spot was cleared among the disarray. Within the random sheets, she noticed one she could understand. Her heart warmed when she began reading Bernard's letter to Archie. She gasped when she saw a note addressed to her. "Evelyn, I'm going on an adventure. Benny." When she finished, she picked up the sheets with the strange writing as her husband was clearing his way back to her. A part of her knew that Bernard's heart had changed. Evelyn knew he wasn't here and hoped he was traveling on a journey the likes of which no one could imagine. "He's not here. No sign of the dog, either. I've checked everywhere. No one's here." "Could he have gone to a friend's place?" Clifford said as he returned to Evelyn. "A friend's place. This is Benny, darling." "Right," Clifford said as he pushed a chair out of the way to get closer. "We need to call the police." Evelyn nodded in agreement, but something deep inside told her that Bernard wouldn't be found. He'd listened to her. "Honey," Evelyn pulled Clifford close to her and hugged him tightly before giving him a kiss on his cheek. "Let's go home." The translation. Evelyn recovered the sheets from 158 Harmony Street, Aurora, Montana, to keep in honor of her friend. One day, decades later, one of her descendants would painstakingly translate the story it told. Once there were 3 honorable princes that didn't know their father's intentions. The firstborn controlled fire, the second controlled ice, and the third wielded them both with the power of his mind. One day the princes, seeking the approval of their father, were asked to find the gods so he could personally show them honor. They traveled the world, seeking a path to the gods. They searched high and low, slaying wizards and warlocks. They chased the secrets known to man and nature, hoping one day they could earn their father's favor. In the end, they found the path, but were told somber things, like their father was evil, which they learned from rival kings. They discovered plans to use their power to capture the gods. They condemned their father's actions and knew their quest was a facade. He would even sacrifice his sons. They knew this to be true. The kings pleaded for them to stop, but they weren't sure what they would do. Confronted with the reality of their father's desire, their hearts forever broken, they knew what was required. They would disobey his wishes and hide the way, bringing their family dishonor, and they wouldn't delay. The firstborn bound the path with fire, while the second contained it in ice. The third controlled them together, knowing they'd all pay the price. In a flash of light and roaring thunder, an explosion sent the princes asunder. The noble trio vanished into the past, their sacrifice forging a cryptic chest without a clasp. One truth remains clear. To unlatch the concealed, a once shattered heart must be healed. The end.